Mike Tyson stood at the edge of the operating table, hands steady despite the chaos in his mind. The room was sterile, everything too clean, too white. His eyes flicked from the unconscious patient on the table to the tools in his hands. It was almost surreal. His fingers, once capable of knocking a man out in a split second, now hovered delicately over someone's chest, ready to repair what had been torn apart. "He's fading," a nurse whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she glanced at Tyson, unsure whether to be afraid or in awe of the man in front of her. The man who had once been a living legend of violence now stood in front of her in scrubs, ready to save a life. But how could a man like him ever really change? Tyson didn't answer. He didn't need to. The room could feel the weight of his presence. It wasn't just the muscles, or the tattoos, or the name, Mike Tyson, former heavyweight champion of the world. It was the weight of his past, the weight of every punch, every fight, every scar he carried, hidden beneath layers of history. The young man on the table had been found bleeding out in an alley, a victim of a random street brawl gone wrong. Tyson had been called in, just another night on call, only this time, it felt different. It felt personal. Because this wasn't just another trauma case. This was another chance. A chance to prove to himself, to the world, that the fighter he once was, the monster he had been, wasn't the man who stood here now. He had been given a second shot at life, and by God, he would take it. The kid's pulse was fading. Tyson's hands were no longer shaking, but the sweat on his brow was a constant reminder that he wasn't immune to fear. He had never been. Not when he was facing off against the biggest names in the ring. Not when he was the one being dragged through the dirt by the demons of his own making. He had learned long ago that fear was something you either controlled or let consume you. His mind flashed back to a time when the only thing that mattered was winning, destroying his opponent, taking everything they had. Back then, Tyson's fists were weapons, his rage a storm that no one could weather. But now his hands were instruments of healing, trying to fix what violence had broken. The irony was sickening, but it was the life he had chosen. It was the life he had to live with. "Stay with me," Tyson muttered under his breath as he worked, pushing the surgical instruments with precision. This wasn't just surgery, it was a battle. A fight against time, against fate. But unlike the fights of his past, this one had no knockout. This one was about saving someone else from the wreckage he had left behind. With a deep breath, Tyson leaned closer, his face inches from the open wound, feeling the heat of the body beneath him. His thoughts shifted back to the first fight he had ever lost. Not in the ring, but in his own heart. That night he had left the ring a champion, but something inside him had died. Something that had never been fixed, no matter how many victories he claimed. That gnawing emptiness had eaten away at him, a hunger that no victory could ever fill. It wasn't until he walked away from the ring and found the cold, clinical walls of a hospital that he realized what he had been searching for. A sense of redemption. The young man's pulse was slowing again. Tyson's mind snapped back to the present. No time for nostalgia. No time for reflection. Just the task at hand. He could hear the faint beeping of the heart monitor in the background, each beep like a countdown to something more than just this surgery. Something larger. A chance to prove he wasn't a monster anymore. That he had risen from the ashes of his own destruction. The room seemed to hold its breath as Tyson worked. Each movement was precise, every second felt like it could tip the balance. The nurse, still watching him with a mix of awe and fear, stood by, ready to assist, but knowing this wasn't just about medical skill. This was about something else. This was about Tyson's need to prove to himself that he could be more than the man he once was. His life had been a series of battles, a never-ending cycle of violence, fame, and regret. But here now, in this room, he wasn't Mike Tyson, the boxer. He was a doctor. A man with a chance to redeem everything he had lost. As the final stitch was placed, Tyson stepped back and wiped his brow. The young man's heart rate stabilized, the blood flow restored. Tyson let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The battle wasn't over, but for now, he had won. He had saved a life. He turned to the nurse, her eyes wide, impressed despite herself. "Is he gonna make it?" she asked. "He'll make it," Tyson replied, his voice steady. But he wasn't talking about the kid on the table anymore. He was talking about himself. The doors to the operating room opened, and the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Tyson's chest tightened, but he didn't flinch. He was no longer running from his past. It had caught up with him, but this time, he was ready. The man who had once destroyed everything now stood ready to build something new. Even if it meant never escaping the shadows of the man he had been. But for tonight, Mike Tyson, the doctor, had won. And that was enough. Mike Tyson leaned against the cold wall of the hospital corridor, the weight of the past pressing down on him. The fluorescent lights buzzed above him like a constant reminder that nothing here was real, not the white walls, not the sterile instruments, and certainly not the calm composure he had just put on. He ran his hand through his hair and tried to shake the feeling that had taken root in his gut. The world around him was changing, but inside, he was still that broken man he had always been. His old trainer's words echoed in his mind. "Do you really think you're ready for this?" The question felt like a punch in the stomach, and he couldn't avoid the truth. He wasn't ready. He had never been ready. But somehow, he had kept going, fighting battles in the ring, fighting demons in his head. It was only now that he realized how deep the scars ran. They didn't go away with a championship title. They didn't vanish with a new career as a doctor. No. Those scars were a part of him now, stitched into the fabric of his very being. As he walked toward the exit, his hand brushed his hospital badge, the words, Dr. Mike Tyson, printed beneath his name. He had earned this title, hadn't he? He had worked hard to get here. But it felt like a mask, a disguise. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a champion. He was just a man running from something that wouldn't let him go. The air outside was cool, a contrast to the heat swirling in his chest. The city's noise hit him all at once. Honking horns, shouting pedestrians, the hum of a world too fast for him to keep up with. He stepped into his car, the engine growling to life beneath him as he drove down the deserted streets. The rhythmic hum of the tires on the pavement was soothing. But it wasn't enough to drown out the thoughts gnawing at the edges of his mind. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello," he answered, his voice low, still rough from the adrenaline of the operation. A smooth, emotionless voice came through the other end. "Dr. Tyson, we need to talk." The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Something in the way the voice spoke sent a chill through him. "Who is this?" "A friend," the voice replied, with a hint of amusement. "Or perhaps, an old acquaintance." "You've been busy, haven't you, Dr. Tyson?" Tyson's grip on the steering wheel tightened. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, scanning the empty road behind him. "What do you want?" The voice laughed softly. "What do you think we want, Mike? You've been running from us for years. You thought you could leave it all behind, huh? But the past never really lets go, does it?" Tyson's jaw clenched. He wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what this was. The past had come knocking, again. "Listen," Tyson said, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of anger. "I'm not that man anymore. I'm a doctor. I save lives now." The laughter on the other end was colder this time. "A doctor, huh? Let's see how long that lasts. We'll be seeing you soon. We're all coming for you, Mike. All of us." The line went dead before Tyson could respond. He sat there in the silence, his mind racing. Who was this? Who was coming for him? He felt a familiar knot twist in his stomach, the same knot he had felt before every major fight, before every confrontation that threatened to tear him apart. It was fear, raw and unfiltered. But this time, it wasn't a fight he could step into the ring and win. This was something deeper, darker. This was his past, catching up to him. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was ready to face it. His phone buzzed again, this time with a text message. He unlocked his phone and stared at the screen. The message was brief, just one sentence. "We're waiting." The words felt like a punch to the gut. They weren't just threatening him, they were daring him to come back to the man he used to be, the man he had fought so hard to escape. He slammed the phone onto the passenger seat and gripped the wheel tighter, pushing the accelerator down. His mind raced as he sped through the streets. He had left behind his violent past, hadn't he? He had rebuilt himself. He had a purpose now. He wasn't just Mike Tyson the boxer. He was Dr. Mike Tyson, someone who could save lives. He had changed. But in the back of his mind, he knew, maybe no one really changes. Maybe the fight never ends. He pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex, the engine shutting off with a sharp, final sound. He stepped out of the car, his eyes scanning the dimly lit area. The streetlights flickered above him, casting long shadows across the pavement. He didn't know what he was expecting. But there was something in the air tonight. Something that made his skin crawl. Inside his apartment, the phone rang again. This time, Tyson didn't hesitate. He picked it up on the second ring. "Mike," a familiar voice said. It was his old trainer, Jared. "I need to talk to you." Tyson's chest tightened. "Jared, I just got a call, from someone I haven't heard from in years." The line was silent for a long moment. "I know," Jared finally said, his voice strained. "I tried to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "It's not just your past that's coming for you, Mike," Jared replied, his tone shifting. "It's your future. You've been living with a lie, and it's about to catch up with you." Tyson's heart skipped a beat. "What the hell are you talking about?" Jared paused. "I don't have time to explain everything. But you need to know this, you're not who you think you are. Not anymore." Tyson's world tilted. "What do you mean?" "Meet me at the old gym tomorrow," Jared said. "I'll explain everything. But trust me, Mike, you're not safe. Not yet." The line went dead, leaving Tyson with a sinking feeling in his gut. He stared at the phone for a long moment, the words echoing in his mind. "You're not who you think you are." A cold wave of dread washed over him. He wasn't sure what Jared knew, but he knew one thing for certain now. The fight wasn't just about saving lives. It was about saving himself from something darker than he could have imagined. The next morning, Mike Tyson stood outside the old gym, the place where it had all started. The scent of sweat and leather still lingered in the air, despite the years that had passed. The building looked like it had been through its own battles, broken windows, cracked walls, and a door that creaked when pushed open. Everything about this place was a reminder of who he used to be, who he was trying to leave behind. The neon sign flickered above him, barely holding onto its last breath, just like the remnants of the man he had once been. Tyson stepped inside, his footsteps heavy against the worn wooden floorboards. The smell of old punching bags, heavy gloves, and liniment oil hit him instantly. He used to come here every day, pushing his body beyond its limits, training for the next fight, the next moment of glory. But now, he was here for something else, for answers. Jared was sitting on the same bench where they had once spent hours talking strategy, hours planning Tyson's rise to the top. The man had been more than a trainer to him. He had been a father figure, a guide in the darkest moments. But as Tyson walked toward him, something was different. Jared's face was pale, his eyes sunken, and there was a heaviness to his posture that Tyson hadn't seen before. "Jared," Tyson called, his voice tentative, unsure of what to expect. Jared looked up, his tired eyes locking onto Tyson's with a mixture of guilt and concern. "Mike, you shouldn't have come," he said, his voice rough. "Too late for that, man. You called me. You said you had answers," Tyson replied, his words edged with impatience. "What's going on? Who's coming for me?" Jared exhaled deeply, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's not just the past coming for you, Mike. It's the life you've been living. The life you think you've rebuilt. It's all built on a lie." Tyson frowned. "What the hell are you talking about? I'm not that guy anymore. I'm a doctor now. I'm trying to help people. I've changed." Jared stood up slowly, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "You really think you've changed, don't you? You think the guy who lived for destruction is gone?" Tyson's chest tightened, and a flash of anger flickered in his eyes. "I'm not that guy anymore, Jared." Jared's eyes hardened, his expression darkening. "But you're still wearing his skin, Mike. And that skin, it's not done with you yet." There was a silence that stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Tyson could feel the heat of his old rage rising, the one thing that had always driven him, the one thing he had never been able to completely shake off. He clenched his fists at his sides, trying to calm himself, but it was no use. Jared wasn't done. "Mike, there's something you don't remember. Something I didn't want you to know. Back when you were at the height of your career, when you were a beast in the ring, you made some deals. Deals that—" Tyson's blood ran cold. "What kind of deals?" "Some people helped you. They helped you get to the top. But they didn't do it out of the goodness of their hearts. There were strings attached, Mike. Big strings. And now, those strings are being pulled again." Tyson took a step back, his mind racing. "What do you mean? Who the hell are you talking about?" Jared's eyes flickered to the door, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm talking about the people who have been controlling your every move, Mike. They never let you go. They've been watching you. You were just a puppet. A boxer with no real control over his own fate. They made sure you were always fighting for them, fighting for what they wanted, not for what you thought you were." Tyson's breath caught in his throat, a cold sweat beginning to form on the back of his neck. "No. No, that can't be true." Jared looked at him, a mix of pity and warning in his eyes. "It is. And they've never let go, Mike. The moment you walked away from the ring and became a doctor, they saw it as a threat. They saw you as a loose end. That's why they've been sending messages. That's why they called you last night. They're coming for you, and they won't stop until they've got what they want." The words hit Tyson like a punch to the gut. He staggered back, leaning against the wall for support. The reality of what Jared was saying settled in, gnawing at him. All this time, he had thought he was building a new life, a new identity. But now, the idea that he had never really been in control of his own fate felt like a betrayal. "They want something from me, don't they?" Tyson finally said, his voice hollow. Jared nodded grimly. "You have something they need, Mike. And they'll stop at nothing to get it." Tyson's mind raced. What could he possibly have that these people, whoever they were, could want? He thought about the old gym, the trophies, the fights, the fame. Had all of it been a game to them? Were his wins just part of their plan? Jared's voice cut through his thoughts. "Mike, you need to be careful. They won't just come for you. They'll come for everyone you care about. You have to end it. Now." Tyson felt the room closing in around him. The weight of the truth pressed down on him, and he finally understood what Jared meant. He wasn't just fighting for redemption anymore. He was fighting for his life, for the lives of those around him. The past wasn't something he could outrun anymore. It was closing in, and he was going to have to face it head-on. As he stood there, a plan beginning to form in his mind, he heard the sound of tires screeching outside the gym. He rushed to the window, his heart pounding in his chest. In the distance, he saw black SUVs pull up to the curb, their tinted windows reflecting the dull glow of the streetlights. "They're here," Jared said quietly. "This is it, Mike. There's no turning back." Tyson felt his pulse quicken. The fight was coming to him, and this time, it wasn't in the ring. The battle for his life was about to begin. The black SUVs pulled up to the curb, their tires screeching in a slow, deliberate fashion, as if the world was about to stop for a moment. Tyson's chest tightened. He couldn't remember the last time he felt this much fear, this much raw dread. Sure, he'd been scared before, when he was younger, stepping into the ring with men who could knock him out with one punch. But this was different. This was real. This was his past coming back to drag him under. He turned away from the window, his mind racing. His eyes locked onto Jared, whose face had gone pale, his lips trembling like a man who knew the storm was already here. "You've got to get out of here, Mike," Jared said urgently, his voice rough, almost pleading. "They won't stop. Not until they have what they want." Tyson swallowed hard, pushing the fear aside. It wasn't the time for panic. It wasn't the time for second-guessing. "No," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm not running anymore." Jared's eyes widened, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Mike, they're not just here to scare you. They'll kill anyone who stands in their way. I'm not saying you're not tough, but nothing," Tyson cut him off. "I'm done being afraid. I'm done hiding." He walked to the door, pushing past Jared. His hands were steady now, his resolve hardening like steel. He had fought in the ring for years, but this fight? This was for his soul. The life he'd built, his second chance, was being threatened by people who had no idea what he had gone through. No idea what he had fought to become. Tyson stepped outside the gym, the night air sharp against his skin. The SUVs were still parked at the curb, their tinted windows offering no insight into who was inside. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from the alley as the figures began to step out of the cars, shadows at first, but now fully visible. There were 5 of them. They moved like trained operatives, silent, purposeful, and terrifying. But there was something about their leader, the man in front. He wasn't like the others. He was older, dressed in a sleek black suit, his face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. Tyson could feel his gaze even from this distance. Cold, calculating, unforgiving. The leader took a step forward, his voice carrying through the night air. "Mike Tyson," he called, his tone sharp, as if the name was a curse on his tongue. "We've been waiting for you." Tyson didn't flinch. He stood tall, his feet planted firmly on the cracked pavement of the old gym parking lot. The years of boxing, of fighting for respect, of surviving in a world that constantly tried to tear him down, had all led to this moment. He wasn't going to back down now. He couldn't. "I don't know who you are," Tyson said, his voice steady but filled with quiet fury, "but I'm not who you think I am. I'm done with whatever game you're trying to play." The leader chuckled, the sound dark and menacing. "You don't remember, do you?" he said, his voice like ice. "You were never just a boxer, Mike. You were our asset. Our weapon. And you're still ours. We own you." Tyson's blood ran cold. He shook his head, disbelief flickering across his face. "No. No, you don't." The man's eyes narrowed. "The moment you signed those papers, the moment you agreed to their terms, you became ours. You were never meant to walk away from that life. You were never meant to be a doctor, a hero. You were a tool. A tool to do our bidding." Tyson took a step back, the words like a punch to his gut. His entire life, his rise, his fall, his so-called redemption, was nothing but a setup. A carefully constructed lie. It felt like the walls around him were closing in, like the very ground beneath him was slipping away. "You're lying," Tyson muttered, shaking his head. "That's not true. I've earned everything I've got. I'm not your pawn." The man's eyes flashed with something darker, more dangerous. "Oh, but you are, Mike. You always were. Your victories, your championships, your fame, they were all carefully orchestrated by people who needed you to be something you weren't. And now that you've stopped being useful to them, it's time to collect." Tyson's mind raced, every word sinking deeper into his skin. He thought back to the fights, the training, the blood and sweat he had shed for the glory, for the people who looked up to him. Had it all been a lie? Had he really been someone's puppet, dancing to their tune without even knowing it? The leader took another step forward, the others following his lead. "But that's not why we're here. We're here to remind you that you never escaped. You never truly left. You're still one of us." Tyson's fists clenched at his sides. His heart hammered in his chest, and for a moment, he was back in the ring, fighting for his life, fighting for something that mattered. The fear began to fade, replaced by the thing that had always driven him, the need to prove himself. "I'm not your weapon," Tyson growled, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm my own man. And I'm not afraid of you." The man in the suit smiled coldly. "We'll see about that, Mike. We always do." Suddenly, without warning, the group moved. The sound of footsteps quickened, and the air seemed to thicken, like the world itself was holding its breath. Tyson's body went on autopilot. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He moved. The first man lunged at him, but Tyson was ready. He sidestepped the attack, his foot coming up to kick the man's legs out from under him. The impact was brutal, the man crashing to the ground in a heap. Tyson didn't wait. He turned to the next one, blocking a punch with a quick, calculated motion, and landed an uppercut that sent the second attacker stumbling back. The others rushed in, but Tyson was faster now. The rhythm of the fight was in his blood. He wasn't the broken man they thought they could control. He was Mike Tyson, and he wasn't going down without a fight. The leader watched, unmoved, as his men were taken out one by one. Finally, he stepped forward, drawing a gun from beneath his coat. Tyson froze, his instincts flaring as he locked eyes with the man. "This is your last chance, Mike," the leader said, his voice cold and final. "Come with us, or watch everyone you care about pay the price." The gun trembled in his hand, but Tyson didn't back down. "I've already lost everything," he said, his voice steady. "What's left for you to take?" The leader's finger hovered over the trigger, but the look in Tyson's eyes, the defiance, the fire, made him hesitate. For a moment, everything was still, the world between them suspended in time. And then, without another word, the leader turned and walked back to the SUV, signaling his men to follow. They piled into the cars, the engines roaring to life as they drove away, leaving Tyson standing alone in the parking lot. The adrenaline surged through him, but his body was still, every muscle tight with tension. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was a new fire burning inside him, a fire that wouldn't go out. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something bigger, his freedom, his redemption, and his chance to finally break free from the chains of his past. The fight was far from over. Tyson stood in the empty gym, his chest heaving, the lingering echoes of the confrontation still ringing in his ears. The night had left him physically drained, but it was the weight of what had just happened that sank deep into his bones. The fight was no longer just about survival. It was about something much more dangerous, his identity, his past, and his future. The black SUVs were gone now, swallowed up by the city's winding streets, leaving nothing behind but the stillness. The air around him was thick with the aftermath, the silence almost suffocating. His fists were bruised from the altercation, but it was his mind that ached. Every word the leader had spoken echoed in his mind like a ticking clock counting down to something inevitable. "You were never meant to walk away from that life. You were a tool. A weapon." Tyson shook his head as if trying to shake the words from his thoughts, but they stayed there, embedded, gnawing at the edges of his mind. He had spent years convincing himself that he had left his violent past behind, that the doctor in him, the man who saved lives, was the true version of himself. But now, it all felt like a lie. They had always owned him, and somehow, he had been too blind to see it. A creak behind him pulled Tyson from his thoughts. Jared stepped into the room, his face drawn, his eyes clouded with worry. He had stayed hidden during the fight, but now that the dust had settled, the trainer seemed to sense the shift in the air. "You're not the same man you were last night," Jared said quietly, his voice thick with concern. Tyson didn't respond at first. His fists were still clenched at his sides, his muscles rigid. He felt the fire inside him burning brighter now. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but one thing was certain. He wasn't running anymore. His hands, the ones that had once destroyed, now had a new purpose. He had to finish this. He had to confront the truth. "I thought I had escaped," Tyson finally said, his voice hoarse, the weight of the realization sinking in. "I thought the ring was the end. But they never let me go, did they?" Jared hesitated, walking slowly toward him. "Mike, you didn't just leave. You were taken. You were always meant to be someone's weapon. It was part of the deal, part of the life they built for you." Tyson clenched his jaw, his mind reeling. "What else? What else haven't you told me? You can't just drop something like that and walk away. What the hell are you talking about? Who are these people?" Jared's gaze faltered for a moment. "They're powerful, untouchable, people you never thought would be involved in your life. Not just the ones who put you in the ring, but those who profited off of your victories. And now that you're free, they're coming for you, because you're the key to everything they've been hiding." Tyson felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. "What do they want from me?" Jared stepped forward, lowering his voice as if the walls themselves might be listening. "It's not just your past, Mike. They want control. They always have. They've used you as leverage for years, and now that you've walked away, they'll stop at nothing to keep you in their grip." Tyson's pulse quickened. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still so much missing. He had been a pawn in a game he hadn't even known he was playing, and now the stakes were higher than ever. But it wasn't just about saving himself anymore. It was about taking back control, not just of his life, but of his destiny. "I'm not going back," Tyson muttered, the words slipping from his lips like a vow. "I won't be anyone's pawn again." Jared nodded gravely. That's the spirit. But it's not going to be easy. You have to face them, Mike. You can't keep running. They won't stop until they've got what they want, and you're the key. Tyson met his trainer's eyes, the weight of their shared history settling between them. I'm done being afraid. Let's end this. Without another word, Tyson turned and walked toward the exit. Jared didn't stop him. There was nothing left to say. Tyson knew that this wasn't just about confronting the past. It was about breaking the chains that had bound him for so long. The game was far from over, but it was time for him to take control. The drive to the city felt different this time. Tyson didn't feel the dread he had before, nor the fear of what might happen. Now, there was only one thing on his mind: answers. And the answers were in the city, in the people who had created him, controlled him, and used him for their own gain. He needed to find them before they found him. As he pulled into a quiet street near a rundown building, his heart rate spiked. This was it. The place where it had all started, the place where the strings had been pulled. He could feel their presence like an unspoken pressure in the air. This was where they would find him, where they would come to finish what they started. But Tyson wasn't waiting for them to make the first move anymore. This time, he was going to make the move himself. He stepped out of the car, his body tense, his fists still bruised from the previous fight. The silence of the night felt suffocating, but he welcomed it. It was time to confront the people who had been watching him, controlling him, for so long. The building in front of him was quiet, its windows boarded up, its doors locked tight. But Tyson knew better than anyone. Nothing was ever truly locked when you had the right tools. He stepped toward the back of the building, his breath steady, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Every instinct told him that this was a trap, but Tyson didn't care. He had been in traps before. He had survived worse. As he reached the back door, the sound of voices carried in the air, low and conspiratorial. Tyson froze, his heart racing. They were here. They were waiting. He had come for them, and now they would finally know what it felt like to be hunted. But what Tyson didn't realize was that this wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. This wasn't just about finding answers. It was about discovering the truth of who he was, who he had been, and what he was willing to sacrifice to finally break free. He turned the doorknob slowly, and as it clicked open, he stepped into the darkness, ready to face whatever came next. The door creaked open, and Tyson stepped into the darkness, his breath slow and controlled. The musty smell of old wood and stale air filled his lungs. His heart pounded in his chest, but it wasn't fear that drove him now, it was something else. Something deeper. Something primal. He had walked into the ring countless times, but this was a different kind of battle. He wasn't fighting for a belt, for fame, or for redemption anymore. He was fighting for his life. His footsteps echoed through the empty hallways of the building. The sound was deafening in the silence, each step amplifying the tension building in his chest. He knew they were here. He could feel them watching him, the eyes of the people who had controlled him for so long. The walls seemed to close in around him, like the building itself was alive, breathing in sync with his every move. Tyson didn't stop. He couldn't. The hallway stretched before him, dark and narrow, but he kept moving forward. His fingers curled around the gun he had tucked in the waistband of his pants. He didn't plan on using it, he never had before, but he wasn't naive enough to think he could walk in here without some kind of defense. He had learned that lesson the hard way. The sudden flicker of lights overhead made him flinch, but he didn't hesitate. The faint hum of electricity buzzed through the air, and the room before him lit up in patches, revealing a long table covered with papers, scattered documents, and maps. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find in a rundown building. It felt too organized, too deliberate. Too much like a command center. He paused, scanning the room. There was no movement. No sound. But Tyson knew better than to assume the room was empty. He was being watched. His eyes fell on a chair at the far side of the room. There was someone sitting there, his back turned toward Tyson, but Tyson could feel his presence, even from this distance. "Looking for me?" a voice called out, breaking the silence. Tyson's muscles tensed, but he didn't flinch. He had been in enough confrontations to know how to handle this. He stepped into the room, his feet light on the floor as he moved toward the chair. The man sitting there didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He already knew Tyson was there. "You think you can just waltz in here and confront me, Mike?" the man said, his voice smooth and cold. "You think you can take back control after everything we've done for you? After everything we've built for you?" Tyson's jaw tightened. "I don't owe you anything anymore." The man slowly spun in the chair, facing Tyson at last. Tyson's breath caught as his eyes locked onto the man's face. He was older than Tyson expected, his features sharp, his eyes calculating and cold. But what hit Tyson hardest wasn't the man's face. It was the familiarity, the recognition in his eyes. The man before him wasn't just someone Tyson had crossed paths with once. He had seen him before, long before. "You," Tyson muttered, his voice shaking slightly. "You're the one." The man smiled, a thin, knowing smile that sent a chill through Tyson's spine. "I'm the one who made you, Mike. The one who made sure you had everything you needed to rise to the top. I gave you the world, and in return, you gave me your soul." Tyson's heart began to race, his mind spinning. "You've been controlling me this whole time?" The man didn't flinch. "You were a tool, Mike. A weapon, nothing more. And you were perfect for the job. You had the drive, the rage, the power. We put you in the ring, gave you the stage, and you played your part. And when you were done, we made sure you didn't walk away. You think you walked out of that life? No. You were always ours." The words hit Tyson like a punch to the gut. The anger that had simmered beneath the surface for years began to boil over, but Tyson held it in check. He couldn't lose control now. Not when he was so close. "What do you want from me?" Tyson growled, his voice tight with barely restrained fury. The man stood, his slow, deliberate movements betraying his calm demeanor. "We want what we've always wanted, Mike. Power. Control. You. And now that you've stepped out of line, we're here to take what's ours." Tyson's breath caught. The man wasn't just threatening him, he was threatening everything he had built, everything he had fought for. But Tyson wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. He had spent too many years running, too many years being manipulated. "You won't control me again," Tyson said, his voice low and full of intent. The man's smile didn't falter. "You're right about one thing. You won't be controlled again. But it's too late, Mike. You've already crossed the line. You've already made yourself a target. And now, you'll be the one to pay." Tyson's eyes narrowed. "I'm not afraid of you." The man chuckled, a soft, chilling sound that sent a ripple of unease through Tyson. "You should be." A sudden noise cut through the tension, a sharp, metallic click followed by the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Tyson's heart skipped a beat. Before he could react, a figure stepped into the doorway, holding a gun aimed directly at him. Tyson's instincts kicked in, his body moving before his mind could process. He lunged toward the nearest cover, an old filing cabinet, and pulled out his own gun in one swift motion. The room exploded in chaos as the two men opened fire, bullets ricocheting off the walls, the deafening sound of gunshots filling the air. Tyson ducked behind the cabinet, his heart pounding as he took cover. His mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. The man in the chair, the one who had controlled him for so long, was standing just a few feet away, and now Tyson understood the full scope of the situation. This wasn't just about survival. This wasn't just about confronting the past. This was about ending it once and for all. With one fluid motion, Tyson sprang from behind the cabinet, gun aimed, his body reacting on instinct. The shots came fast, but Tyson's hand was steady. He took out the armed figure in the doorway with a single shot, then turned his attention back to the man who had ruined his life. The man's smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief as he took a step back, reaching for his own weapon. "You've got nowhere to run," Tyson said, his voice low but filled with a quiet rage. The man's eyes darted to the door, but before he could make a move, Tyson had him pinned against the wall, the gun pressing into his chest. "You were never in control, not of me, not of anything," Tyson said, his voice full of finality. "And now, it's over." The man's eyes widened as Tyson's grip tightened. "You've lost, and you'll never hold anyone in your grip again." With one swift motion, Tyson pulled the trigger, ending the nightmare once and for all. As the room fell silent, Tyson's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The battle was over, but the war? That was just beginning. He was no longer a puppet. He was no longer Mike Tyson, the fighter. He was someone else now, someone who could finally take control of his own destiny. But the truth was clear. No matter what he had done, no matter how far he'd come, his past was never really behind him. The fight, it seemed, would always follow him. Tyson stood in the middle of the room, the weight of the silence pressing down on him. The man who had controlled him, manipulated his every move, lay lifeless at his feet. The gun in his hand still smoked, but his hand had long stopped trembling. The fight was over. The man who had orchestrated his past was gone, and the future, Tyson's future, was no longer in the hands of someone else. But as the reality of the moment settled in, something gnawed at the edges of his mind. The air in the room felt colder now, the walls closing in once more. Was it really over? Or had he just opened the door to a whole new set of problems? The sound of approaching footsteps snapped him out of his thoughts. Tyson spun around, instinctively raising his gun. But it wasn't another enemy. It was Jared, his trainer, his former father figure, standing in the doorway, his eyes filled with something Tyson couldn't quite place. Worry. Relief. Maybe both. Mike! Jared's voice was shaky, his words trailing off as he took in the scene in front of him. The body. The gun. Tyson, standing like a statue in the middle of it all. Tyson lowered the gun slowly, his hands shaking for the first time all night. It's done, Jared. It's finally done. Jared stepped into the room, his face pale, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Mike, I didn't know you were going to. I didn't have a choice, Tyson interrupted, his voice raw, eyes locked on the lifeless body. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to kill him? But I had no choice. I had to take control. I couldn't live like that anymore, not knowing that my life was never mine. That I was always someone's tool, someone's weapon. Jared took a step closer, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. I know, Mike. I know. But I didn't want you to go this far. You didn't have to do this. There were other ways. Other ways. Tyson's laugh was bitter, edged with frustration. I don't know any other way, Jared. That's the problem. My whole life has been a series of fights, inside the ring, outside the ring, with myself. I never had control. But I do now. And I'm not going to let anyone take that from me again. There was a long pause, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Jared's eyes softened as he regarded Tyson, as if he were seeing the man in front of him for the first time. Not the boxer. Not the machine. But the man, the one who had been broken, rebuilt, and broken again. You've done what you needed to do, Jared said quietly. But you can't do this alone, Mike. This fight, it's not over. Not yet. Tyson didn't answer. He couldn't. He didn't know what came next. He had spent his entire life running from his past, pretending it didn't exist, pretending it didn't control him. Now that he had confronted it, now that he had won, he was left standing in the aftermath, unsure of how to pick up the pieces. The gun in his hand felt heavier now. He stared at it, the weight of his actions settling in. Had he done the right thing? Was this really freedom, or was he just caught in another trap of his own making? You've got to move forward, Jared said, his voice urgent now. You can't stay here. You can't keep looking back at what you've done. You have to keep moving. Tyson's gaze lifted, meeting Jared's eyes. The trainer's words were familiar, but they didn't hit him the way they used to. There was no adrenaline left to numb the fear. No fight left to keep him from seeing the truth. He wasn't just fighting other people anymore. He was fighting himself. I don't know where to go from here, Jared, Tyson said softly, his voice betraying the uncertainty that had taken root. I don't know what's next. Jared sighed, his eyes softening with understanding. You don't have to know. You just have to take the next step. And the next. It's the only way out. Tyson nodded slowly, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and clarity all at once. He wasn't sure what he would do next. He wasn't sure who he was without the weight of the past pressing down on him, without the boxing ring to define him. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going back. Not to that life. Not to those people. Let's go, Tyson said, his voice a quiet promise to himself. Let's get out of here. Jared hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Together, they turned and walked toward the door, leaving the darkness of the room behind them. But even as they stepped into the light of the city streets, Tyson knew that the journey was far from over. In the distance, headlights flickered in the night. Another car. Another reminder that the world had a way of catching up to you. The people who had controlled him before, they would come for him again. He could feel it. The darkness never truly leaves. But for now, he had something he hadn't had in years: control. The fight was no longer just about surviving, it was about living. And for the first time in his life, Tyson felt like he had the power to make his own choices. To walk away from the destruction that had always followed him. But the real test was just beginning. Would he be able to keep moving forward? Or would the shadows of his past swallow him whole once more? The city stretched out before him, vast and endless, and Tyson didn't know what was coming next. But he was ready to face it. Because for the first time, he wasn't just fighting for a title. He was fighting for himself. And that, he realized, might be the hardest fight of all. The city loomed around Tyson like a labyrinth, sprawling and alive with a pulse that felt foreign to him now. It had always been easy to lose himself in the noise, in the chaos, back when he was someone else, back when he had been a fighter. But now, each corner he turned, each alley he passed, felt like a mirror. Every step reflected a piece of the man he used to be, the man he couldn't outrun. Tyson didn't speak as they walked through the streets, his gaze fixed ahead. Jared, walking beside him, kept his eyes trained on the ground, as if he didn't want to say the wrong thing. It was as if Tyson had crossed some invisible line, one that had been blurred by years of manipulation, by a fight that wasn't just physical but emotional, psychological. And now that it was over, or so he thought, Tyson was left with a void. It was the same void that had always haunted him, the one that had driven him to box, to fight, to become someone bigger than himself. But now there was nothing left to fight for. The night air was thick with the sounds of the city, honking horns, distant sirens, the murmur of voices, and the occasional shout echoing in the distance. But all Tyson could hear was the ringing in his ears. It was the silence that terrified him the most. It was the kind of silence that only came after a war had ended, after the battlefield was littered with the remnants of what had been, what had almost been, and what could never be again. Jared broke the silence first, his voice low. "Mike, you've done it. You took control. You made sure they couldn't keep running your life. That's something." Tyson's lips twitched, the barest hint of a smile. But it was empty. It didn't reach his eyes. "Did I, though?" he murmured, more to himself than to Jared. "Did I really?" Jared's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I'm still the same guy, Jared," Tyson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just killed a man. What does that make me?" Jared stopped walking, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face him. "You did what you had to do, Mike. You survived." "Survived?" Tyson repeated bitterly. "I didn't survive, Jared. I killed him. I killed him because I thought it would finally end all the shit that's been hanging over me. But it didn't. It doesn't." There it was, the weight of it all. It had never been about the violence, the fights, the championships, or even the people who had tried to use him. It had always been about what Tyson could never escape, his own darkness. He had buried it under layers of fame, anger, and pride, and now, standing in the middle of the city, he realized that the fight he had been waging for so long wasn't with anyone else. It had always been with himself. "You can't undo what you've done, Mike," Jared said, his voice gentler now, as if he understood what was happening inside Tyson's head. "But you can choose what comes next. You don't have to keep running. Not anymore." Tyson shook his head slowly. "I don't know what to do anymore. I've spent my whole life fighting. Now that it's over, I don't know how to just live." Jared sighed, the sound heavy with understanding. "You live, Mike. You start fresh. You find a new purpose. The fight isn't over, but it's different now. You don't have to keep fighting yourself." Tyson turned away, his eyes drifting to the horizon, where the skyline of the city was bathed in the cold light of street lamps. There, in the distance, was a reminder of everything he had fought for, everything he had sacrificed. A symbol of the man he had once been. And yet, standing there now, it felt like an illusion. A dream that had slipped through his fingers. "I thought I could walk away from it all," Tyson said, his voice barely audible. "I thought I could just leave the ring, leave the past behind, and be a different person. But I can't. I can't just wake up one day and be someone else. No matter how hard I try, that guy is still with me. Always." "You don't have to be him again," Jared said quietly. "You don't have to be anyone's monster. You have to be yourself. Mike Tyson. The man who's done more than just fight." Tyson didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth was, he didn't know who that man was anymore. He had spent so long chasing redemption, so long fighting for control, that he had never once stopped to ask himself what he truly wanted. And now, standing at the crossroads of his life, he was faced with a question far more complicated than any fight he had ever faced in the ring. What was left? The answer didn't come quickly. It didn't come at all, not right away. Instead, Tyson stood in the stillness, staring into the night, feeling the years of his past press against him like a weight he couldn't escape. He was a man torn between two worlds, the one he had tried to escape, and the one he had yet to create. But the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He didn't need to be a hero. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The only thing that mattered was what he chose to do next. With a sigh, he turned back to Jared, his voice steady. "Let's go," he said. "Let's get out of this city." Jared raised an eyebrow. "Where to?" Tyson looked around at the bustling streets, the lights flashing, the cars speeding past. "Somewhere where I can hear myself think," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Somewhere where I can finally figure out who I am. Not who I was. Not who they made me. But who I am now." For the first time in a long time, Tyson felt something stir inside him. It wasn't fear or anger. It wasn't a desire to fight. It was something else. Hope, maybe. Or maybe it was the first glimmer of a future he could shape for himself. The city was behind him, but it had changed something in him. He wasn't running anymore. Jared nodded, the faintest smile crossing his lips. "I think that's a good place to start." Tyson started walking, his steps slow but certain. The city was still there, still waiting. But for once, he wasn't afraid to face it. Not anymore. The fight wasn't over. But this time, it wasn't a battle for survival. It was a battle for a life he could finally call his own. And that, he realized, was worth fighting for. As they walked down the street, Tyson felt the tension start to melt away. He had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. He wasn't defined by his past. He was defined by what came next. And that was enough. The road ahead stretched long and uncertain, but with every step, Tyson felt a little lighter, a little more free. The weight of the past still hung on him, heavy like a storm cloud, but it wasn't as suffocating as before. With Jared beside him, they walked through the city streets, their footsteps synchronized as they passed neon lights and crowded sidewalks, the hum of life moving around them. But Tyson was no longer part of the noise. For the first time, he felt like an observer rather than a participant, no longer bound by the expectations of his past. The car they'd borrowed sat quietly in the parking lot, the engine humming to life as Tyson slid into the driver's seat. Jared took the passenger side, the silence between them now comfortable, though filled with an unspoken tension. Tyson kept his hands firmly on the wheel, his knuckles tight, but his mind was far away. The miles stretched out in front of him like a path to somewhere else, somewhere new. He didn't know where that was. He didn't know what lay ahead. But for the first time in years, he felt like he had the power to choose. Jared broke the silence, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Mike, you've done something most people never could. You took control of your life. You took out the man who controlled you. That's not easy. But I need to ask, what now?" The question hung in the air like a weight that Tyson hadn't considered. What now? He had spent his entire life fighting for something, anything. First it was for survival, then for validation, then for redemption. But now, with that man, his captor, his former master, dead at his feet, what was left? "I don't know, Jared," Tyson said, his voice raw but steady. For the first time, I don't have a fight to fight. No one's controlling me anymore. But I don't know what to do with that. I've spent so long just trying to survive, trying to fix what's broken, I don't even know where to start." Jared nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "That's the hardest part, Mike. It's not about fixing what's broken anymore. It's about finding peace with what is. You don't need to be someone else. You just need to be who you are. And that's more than enough." Tyson's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his eyes focused on the road ahead, but his thoughts were miles away. He had spent so long wearing a mask, playing a part. Mike Tyson, the boxer. The monster. The champion. But who was Mike Tyson without the gloves, without the fame, without the persona? Was he still someone worth fighting for? He glanced at Jared, the man who had seen him at his lowest and still stood by him. The man who had taught him discipline and grit, and who now believed he could find a new path. Tyson didn't feel like that man. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of his past. "I don't know if I can just let go," Tyson admitted, his voice tight. "I've spent too many years fighting. I don't know how to stop." "You don't have to stop, Mike," Jared replied. "You just have to change the way you fight. You've always been fighting for something. But now, you're fighting for yourself. You don't need to be someone you're not. You just need to be Mike Tyson, the man who survived everything, and who's ready to move forward." Tyson nodded slowly, processing the words. It wasn't about forgetting who he had been, it was about accepting it, owning it, acknowledging the man he was and the man he could still be. There was no magic fix, no quick redemption. But there was hope. There was the possibility of something different. The miles rolled by in silence, the sound of the engine the only thing keeping Tyson grounded. They passed through small towns, their lights flickering as if they, too, were waiting for something to change. Tyson didn't know what he was looking for, but he felt it, the pull of something new, something unknown. Something waiting just beyond the horizon. As they neared the outskirts of town, a sense of unease crept over him. He had thought leaving the city, leaving everything behind, would feel like liberation. But it felt more like a void. The city had been his battleground, his prison, and now that he was free, he didn't know what to do with the silence. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding. But what was he supposed to do with all the space that had been left in its wake? "You okay?" Jared asked, sensing the change in Tyson's demeanor. Tyson exhaled deeply, his hands loosening their grip on the wheel. "I don't know, man. I thought this would feel different. I thought I'd have all the answers by now. But it's like I'm standing at the edge of something, and I don't know what's next." Jared's voice softened, like a whisper on the wind. "You don't have to know, Mike. Not yet. Sometimes, it's okay not to have the answers. Sometimes, the journey is just about taking the next step, even when you can't see the whole picture." Tyson took a deep breath and nodded, the weight of the road ahead starting to settle in his chest. He had spent so long trying to control everything, to fight every battle, to win every round. But the truth was, he wasn't in control anymore. The fight wasn't about winning. It was about living. And for the first time, Tyson felt a flicker of something inside him, something that wasn't fear, anger, or regret. It was possibility. It was the chance to rebuild, to heal, to be free. They pulled into a small, quiet town by the river, the lights of a diner shining in the distance. Tyson slowed the car, turning off the engine. The cool night air greeted them as they stepped out, the sound of the water flowing gently in the distance. The world felt different here. It wasn't as loud. It wasn't as heavy. Jared clapped him on the shoulder. "This is it, Mike. This is where you start. You don't have to know everything right now. Just take the first step." Tyson looked at the diner, the quiet, peaceful town, and felt the weight of the years finally begin to lift. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what was next. But for the first time, he wasn't running from himself. He was moving forward. And that, he realized, was enough. As they walked toward the diner, Tyson took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs. Whatever came next, he was ready. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But it would be his. And that was more than enough. For the first time in a long time, He felt the stirrings of something inside him that wasn't driven by rage or fear. It was a spark. A flicker of hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was all he needed. The town felt smaller than it was. Quiet, tucked away beneath a blanket of stars. The diner had a warm glow to it, a stark contrast to the icy night air. Tyson stood outside, the door just a few steps away, but something held him back. Maybe it was the sheer weight of what he'd left behind. Maybe it was the strange, unfamiliar peace that seemed to have settled inside him since they arrived. It was like the calm before a storm, or perhaps, more accurately, the calm after the storm. Jared noticed Tyson's hesitation, a silent question in his eyes. "Mike, what's going through your head?" Tyson glanced at his old trainer, his face unreadable. "I don't know. This place, it's different. It's so quiet." Jared chuckled, a low, knowing sound. "That's the point. You're running from noise. You're running from everything that's been drowning you. But now you have to face the silence, Mike. It's the only way to move forward. The noise is still out there, waiting, but for now, you don't have to fight it." The words settled over Tyson like a weight he hadn't expected. He had spent his life fighting, focusing on the next round, the next opponent, the next headline. But what if the fight wasn't the thing he had to worry about anymore? What if the real battle was the one inside? The one between the man he had been and the man he was becoming? Tyson nodded slowly and pushed open the door to the diner. The bell above it jingled softly as they entered, and the warmth hit him like a blanket. The smell of freshly brewed coffee, sizzling bacon, and eggs filled the air. The small-town comfort. It was everything he had never known, and everything he hadn't realized he needed. He slid into a booth by the window, and Jared followed, sitting across from him. The waitress came over, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, and a pencil behind her ear. "What can I get ya, hon?" Tyson hesitated. He wasn't used to feeling this normal, this grounded. The sense of familiarity made him uncomfortable. "Just coffee," he said, his voice rough, still adjusting to the fact that he wasn't rushing through his day, wasn't waiting for the next fight to appear. Jared ordered a plate of eggs, his usual no-nonsense breakfast. The waitress nodded and walked away, leaving them in the quiet of the diner. "You ever think about what's next, Mike?" Jared asked, his tone casual, but the question was loaded. Tyson stared at his hands, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "I try not to. Too many damn nexts in my life already." Jared smirked, but there was something else there, something almost sad. "Yeah. But you can't just ignore it forever. You're not that guy anymore, Mike. You don't need to live in the shadow of who you were. You've been running your whole life, and now you have the chance to stand still. To decide who you want to be." The weight of those words landed heavily on Tyson's chest. Stand still. Decide. It felt impossible. How could he, after everything he'd been through, after the rage that still flickered inside him like an ember? The temptation to lash out was always there, just beneath the surface. But he had already fought so hard for this moment of peace, this chance to leave the violence behind. "Maybe you're right," Tyson said, his voice softer now, reflective. "I've spent my life fighting. Now, I need to figure out how to stop." "Not stop fighting," Jared corrected, his voice firm. "Just fight differently. The fight isn't always with fists. Sometimes it's with your mind. With what you choose to do next." Tyson looked out the window, watching the steady flow of headlights from cars passing by. The world was moving, but he wasn't. Not yet. He felt like he was standing at a precipice, looking out into an unknown future, unsure if he was ready to jump, or if he even had the courage to move. The waitress returned with their orders, setting the steaming coffee in front of Tyson. He took a sip, the warmth spreading through him. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It felt like he could breathe again. "Thanks," Tyson said, almost to himself. Jared gave him a pointed look. "You ever thought about doing something for yourself, Mike? Not for anyone else. Just you." Tyson looked up at him, unsure how to answer. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've always been in survival mode. Always looking over your shoulder, trying to outrun your past. But what if you took the time to create something? What if you used all that strength to build something instead of tear it down? Tyson thought about it for a moment. It wasn't an idea he'd ever entertained. Build something. Create something from nothing. It felt alien. He had always been driven by destruction, by the need to prove something to the world, to himself. But Jared was right. What if he could build instead of break? I don't know if I'm capable of that, Tyson admitted, a flicker of doubt creeping into his voice. You're capable of more than you think, Jared said quietly. You just have to decide who you want to be. You can't live in the past forever. There was a long pause. Tyson stared into his coffee, the steam rising, carrying with it all the thoughts he hadn't been able to voice. His life had been defined by his past, a past filled with violence, fame, and mistakes. It was easy to look at that man and believe that he was all he could ever be. But standing here, in this quiet town, with no audience to perform for, no fight to win, he realized something. He wasn't that man anymore. He wasn't the Mike Tyson who needed to prove himself in the ring. He was someone else. Someone new. And that wasn't something he had to fight for. It was something he could create. What if I try? Tyson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jared smiled, a small, knowing smile. That's all you need. Try. Tyson took another sip of his coffee, the warmth filling him in a way he hadn't expected. He wasn't sure what came next. He wasn't sure who he was becoming. But for the first time, he felt like he had a choice. And that choice, it wasn't to fight. It wasn't to prove anything. It was to live. To create. To be something different. The waitress came back with a check, and Tyson put down enough cash to cover it, leaving a tip. As she walked away, he stood, feeling the weight of the decision settle inside him. It wasn't an answer, not yet. But it was a start. As he and Jared stepped out into the cool night air, Tyson took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. There was no turning back. And for the first time in his life, Tyson didn't feel the need to look over his shoulder. The future was wide open, and it was his for the taking. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it, one step at a time. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the empty streets of the small town. Tyson stood by the diner, watching as the first light of day stretched across the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. It felt like the world was waking up along with him. A new day, a new chance, a new beginning. He had come a long way from the man who once stood on the edge of the ring, fists raised, ready to strike. That man, the one defined by violence, fear, and endless regret, was fading. He could feel it, the slow but steady unraveling of the ties that had bound him to the past. The quiet of the morning was peaceful, and for once, Tyson didn't feel the need to fill the silence with his own thoughts, to drown it out with the noise of his old battles. He could just be. And that was enough. Jared had left earlier, after a quiet conversation. He had told Tyson that his journey wasn't over, that healing wasn't a destination but a process. He had reminded Tyson that, no matter where he went, no matter what he did, he wasn't alone. The fight might never truly end, but now, Tyson didn't have to fight alone. But there was still something in the back of his mind, a nagging question, a haunting thought that had followed him since the moment he killed that man. Was he really free? Could someone like him ever truly escape the weight of his past, or was he doomed to always be the sum of his worst moments? Tyson walked down the sidewalk, his footsteps steady but uncertain. He passed by a group of kids laughing and joking, chasing each other down the street, and he couldn't help but smile. The simplicity of it all, the joy, the freedom, the hope, was something he hadn't experienced in a long time. But it was also something he hadn't realized he'd been craving. He stopped at the edge of the park, looking out over the open space. The world felt wide, full of possibility, yet somehow still intimidating. How did a man like him find his place in a world that wasn't built on fighting? How did he find peace when it seemed like he had never been at peace with himself? The sound of a car engine in the distance interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to see an old, familiar face pulling into the parking lot. His heart skipped a beat when he recognized the car. It was his lawyer. Tyson had hoped that his life might have moved past this, that the man he had killed in that dark, abandoned building would be the last remnant of his past. But he knew, deep down, that there would be no running from the consequences. He had crossed a line, And now, the price would have to be paid. The lawyer stepped out of the car, his face unreadable. Tyson braced himself, his stomach tightening. "Mike," the lawyer said, his voice heavy, almost apologetic. "I need to talk to you." Tyson took a step forward, his pulse quickening. "About what?" The lawyer hesitated, looking around as if to make sure they were alone. "There are people who know what happened. They know who you are. And they want something from you." Tyson's breath caught. "What do they want?" "They want you to work for them again," the lawyer replied, his eyes hardening. "They want you back in the game. The one you walked away from." Tyson's blood ran cold. The weight of the words hit him like a punch to the chest. It wasn't over. It would never be over. The chains he thought he had broken were still there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting to pull him back. "I'm done with that life," Tyson said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've walked away. I'm not going back." The lawyer's expression softened, but there was an edge to his tone. "You don't understand, Mike. They won't let you go. Not unless you do what they want." Tyson took a deep breath, the weight of the situation settling in. The temptation to walk away from it all, to run, was strong. But this time, he wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. "Tell them I'm not their pawn anymore," Tyson said, his voice firm, unwavering. "I'm done being anyone's weapon." The lawyer didn't respond right away. He just nodded, his expression a mixture of resignation and something else, something Tyson couldn't quite read. But it didn't matter. Tyson had made his decision. The lawyer turned and walked back to his car, leaving Tyson standing there, watching him go. He had faced down his past. He had confronted the man who had controlled him. And now, with the knowledge that his past would always be a part of him, he realized something important. He wasn't going to let it control him anymore. The fight was never going to be over. But Tyson was done letting it define him. He was done being defined by the violence, the rage, the persona of the boxer. He was going to live on his terms. With a final glance toward the parking lot, Tyson turned back to the park. The sound of children playing in the distance filled the air, and he couldn't help but feel a surge of something inside him. Peace. The journey was far from over. The road would still be filled with obstacles, with enemies, with doubts. But for the first time in his life, Tyson felt like he could choose which battle to fight. And that, more than anything else, was the true freedom he had been searching for. He didn't have to be who they wanted him to be. He didn't have to play the role they had written for him. He could be Mike Tyson, the man who survived, who fought, and who chose to rebuild, one step at a time. And for the first time in his life, that was enough.